So I own a few model trains. Okay, I own quite a few model trains. So I've gotten a few questions over the past 6 months on Twitter about my train collection, and I thought it'd be a fun and good idea to go through all of them and share some fun facts about each one I own. Starting off is my Bachmann 2 Spectrum 2 Truck Climax. It's the more modern release with the metal gears and can boast that it is the absolute slowest locomotive I own. It's driven like a real Climax with the motor driving the drive gears, which are connected to drive shafts, which drive the wheels. If you're looking for any sort of logger locomotive or a switcher, this is easily one of the best locomotives you can look into. Another Spectrum model, this USRA 482, is probably the oldest locomotive in my collection to have DCC. This locomotive was modified by a previous owner to have DCC sound. I have really big plans for this guy in the future, mostly revolving around a whole new custom body shell. This locomotive also, as you can see in the footage, will not start again. It hates starting and stopping. Another Bachmann, and if models could talk, this one would talk you to death. She has to have the highest mileage of any locomotive I own and has probably clocked over 10 hours of runtime at a single weekend in a train show in 2021. The front light of this locomotive no longer works, but other than that, she sure has put up with quite a lot and has had zero problems. I absolutely had to have a Berkshire in my collection, and of course it had to be 1225. I bought this guy to replace my Lionel H.O. Berkshire, which has to take first prize for the worst locomotive I've ever owned. The Bachmann version of the Berkshire is superior to the Lionel in every single way, and I have not had a single problem with this locomotive, much like the J-Class. Okay, last Bachmann for now, I promise. This locomotive was a birthday present from my grandparents in 2019, and is one of the few and proud Bachmann Northerns from the time with its original shitty nylon gears. I might go and replace these gears one day, I'm not exactly sure yet. This locomotive has a little bit of weathering on it, as it actually was part of a school project at one point. I have plans to remove the weathering, I just haven't gotten around to it. Alright, not a Bachmann this time. Here's the greatest little scrunkle that ever ran. This model was made by Rivarossi in Italy, and it is the deluxe version with the full valve gear and the very smooth running ball bearing motor. I really don't like Rivarossi locomotives at all because I find their performance to be a bit lacking, but this Rivarossi can pull fairly well and runs just as smooth as some modern locomotives. This little 262 made by Mantua has certainly seen better days. Nicknamed Yip by one of my friends, this little guy has had its tenders swapped out with an MDC roundhouse one and then had the trucks replaced with sprung ones. I have no idea what the previous owner was smoking with that. Yip also has the unique achievement of being the only HO scale locomotive that has tried to kill me. It involved fire. I like to think we're on decent terms now, but that's just what I like to think. You've probably seen this one before. I have a card up at the top if you want to see another whole ass video I made on just this locomotive. This locomotive has to have gone through one of the worst hells imaginable, being the first locomotive on the test track at the train show. It was a lot of stopping and starting very abruptly. It takes the cake for my favorite Mantua steam locomotive of all time, and is probably the best conditioned Mantua Atlantic I've ever seen. This goofy little guy has to be one of the fastest locomotives in my entire collection, at least when it makes it over switches. Made by Yamaha, this thing has to have some of the worst pickup of all time since the locomotive picks up only from its tiny drivers. I've made a whole nother video on this guy and two other Conrail painted steam locomotives, so I'll have a card up above if you care about that. Another silly locomotive. This was the locomotive that kicked off my insane obsession to collect all three of the currently known production Conrail steam locomotives. I really need to do work on this guy. It runs right now, but it doesn't like to pull, and it really only wants to run in reverse. I think it needs a new gear. No way. An actual prototypical Conrail locomotive? This is sacrilege. This model was made by Athearn under the Ready to Roll line and is a super smooth and quite slow running locomotive. I actually drove over 3 hours in a single day with a friend to a train store in Kentucky to get this guy, and I almost got murdered by a bad driver with a big pickup. If you're watching this, know that the driver of a blue Mini Cooper that you cut off last summer really hates you. This old power drive Athearn Blue Box model is one of the loudest locomotives I think I've ever owned. I picked up this guy when on vacation in Arizona with family, and I really don't have much to say about this guy, except that it pulls pretty damn well, and the couplers on the A unit are fucking awful. Oh, this is a fun one. This pretty guy was the first locomotive I ever bought at a train show, and is almost entirely die-cast metal. I'll have to make a dedicated video on this guy someday, as it's just too interesting to not talk about. It has to be one of the most fun locomotives to pull out every here and there for a couple colorful laps around my layout. Another train show find. This was my first ever Proto 2000 locomotive, and it's left me with this insatiable appetite for more and more Proto 2000 locomotives. I just haven't bought any. I love the beautiful demonstrator scheme that EMD put on their older models to show off their latest designs. I actually accidentally bought an SD9 because it was put into a box for a GP7. I was quite the big stupid back in 2018. Their train show find. This is a locomotive that needs to be seen to be believed. Lifelike probably just told their design team to make it so real that it hurts, both visually and operational wise. The detail is absolutely exceptional and it runs even better than it looks. It has an excellent tender to locomotive coupling system, which is simple and intuitive, unlike Bachmann's mini plugs that are the bane of my existence. I will make a dedicated video on this guy as well someday. It deserves all the praise in the world. It's a real shame Walthers didn't continue making these after 2014. This locomotive runs really well, I swear. It just seems to have stage fright right now, and it will not run. Ugh. I really love this guy. It's a Walthers mainline GP9 in Conrail colors because it's me. What more do you expect? It's a GP9, but the cab says it's a GP10 since Conrail never actually owned any low-hood GP9s. It's a super smooth runner on DCC and one of my favorite go-to locomotives to run at the club. Ooh, here's something a bit more upmarket. This is my only Broadway Limited locomotive. It left quite an impression on me, and I've been looking at the Broadway Limited website ever since, drooling over locomotives I can't afford. I'm by no means a Santa Fe fan, but I just love the big boiler and the small drivers on this one. It's a super well-made model and very, very detailed with fantastic pulling power. It also has to be the best sounding locomotive I've ever seen. I own two models from across the pond as well, so I think I should probably show them here as well. This Hornby model has me conflicted. It's absolutely stunning to look at, but the tender connection is finicky and terrible, and it loves to stall all the time. The front truck also loves to jump the rails all the time on whatever layout I put it on. I had to film this about 10 times just to get it to come in and then leave. It's nice when it runs, but when it doesn't run, that's completely normal. Easily the better of my two British locomotives, number 4844 Coldstreamer is a Bachmann LNER V2 made in the 90s. It's a silky smooth runner with some pretty good detail for its time with some great pulling power. I really would like to get some freight cars to go with this guy eventually and then put DCC in it and go and overtake some express trains at the club. So we're not done just yet. I've still got locomotives that I am currently working on. Let's start with my 260. I have no idea who made this thing. It looks German and it is quite ugly. I only own this because a Discord friend convinced me to buy it because the seller listed it as has life. I still have no idea what that means, and somebody please take it before it kills me. Please, take it. Take it! Yeah, sadly this locomotive does not work. I never filmed any locomotives running during the Conrail Steam video because this guy didn't run. I'm thinking of maybe trying to find a more modern model power chassis to put it under the hood to make it run and potentially get DCC and sound into it, but for now, I'm more leaning towards just scavenging the next train show for parts. My only other Rivarossi locomotive. This guy was given to me by a friend I went hiking with during Boy Scouts. He has owned this model ever since he bought it new in the 80s, and I'm not exactly sure what's wrong with it yet, although I suspect it may need an entire new motor. I've mostly just been trying to clean it and take care of it. I know she's a rare one. Okay, just because the tender's blue does not mean I'm painting this into Conrail. This is a very much a work-in-progress locomotive, and it's a 260 I'm repainting into a freelance railroad colors. I bought this guy at a train show about 2 years ago, and I'm hoping to get it done and running this summer, so if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Ooh, here's a fun one. This is a Bachmann Spectrum GP30 that I'm about halfway through modifying into a more accurate nickel plate one. This locomotive right now has a nose light cutout, a hole for the bell, and has had its dynamic brakes removed. I'm also hoping to get this one done this summer. I've got some decals that I would like to get made. So this is a very, very important locomotive to me. If you know, you know. Another GP30. I'm not exactly sure what to do with this one just yet. I've had it for a couple years, and the most interesting fact about this one I can think of is the previous owner drilled a singular hole in the front, and it actually runs at a different polarity to my other one. So it runs in reverse when the other one runs forward. Here's one you'll only know about if you've known me for quite a while. I have really big plans for this guy, mostly consisting of a complete rebuild. This locomotive I've owned since 2019 is the first locomotive I ever actually ordered online. Here's a box of parts. I like to laugh at it. So I don't have this locomotive currently on hand, but another project of mine is a USRA Bachmann Light Pacific that is currently getting rebuilt into a C&J G3 that will operate on my freelance railroad. I really, really miss this locomotive. It was always such a great, smooth runner with some pretty good sounds. My favorite thing I ever did with this locomotive was double-head it with my friends Baltimore and Ohio one. Ooh, this 280 has definitely had one of the worst things that could happen to a model locomotive. This locomotive took a 4-foot drop after someone forgot to align a switch on a friend's layout. This only made the Bachmann 280 more legendary in my mind, since now I can think of the locomotive as being pretty damn tough on top of well-detailed and strong. This is my favorite model in the collection, hands down. It's my current main project, and I've owned this locomotive since 2014, and the memories tied to it of a very special person who is unfortunately no longer with us will ensure that I will never sell this locomotive. This locomotive has definitely seen better days. Mostly it's also taken a fall off a table, and I just can't think of any locomotive I want to keep more than this. It's hard to believe that these Bachmann Baldwin Moderns were so slept on while they were in production, and now they're gone and everyone wants one. It's hard to believe how expensive these models are now. These used to go for $150 at most. Yeah, so that's my entire collection. I own 30 locomotives, which is more than I thought I did. I swear I have other hobbies. There's no connection between most of these locomotives, but hey, that's alright, and I have no real loyalties to any certain roads. I do have loyalty to one, which should be fairly obvious. Did a certain model pique your interest? Let me know, and I might actually go and make a dedicated video for it if there's enough demand. If you like this style of video, please let me know. MT, signing off.